Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock. Let's go over what is happening to this absolutely just wild stock lately. And yeah, I'll give you my thoughts moving into next week and potentially even the rest of June. And honestly, I'll even give you my thoughts as to what I think can happen potentially for the rest of the year based on very important factors that I'll go over very soon. But all that being said, let's just dive into it. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, updates, etc., I do share my thoughts with my members every single day as the market is open, constantly as the market is trading, right? So for just $3 a month, you get access to that YouTube membership. That link is below, where you get access to my Tesla updates, options flow, technical analysis, etc. Again, throughout the trading day itself, every single trading day that is open, of course. $5 a month gives you access to that, plus NVDA as well, if you're interested. And then $7 a month gives you access to non-Tesla, non-NVDA stocks that I share sometimes with my members when I see an opportunity. And on the weekend, I do chart requests in the members Discord section. But jumping into it, Tesla closing the day with a pretty okay, we'll say 4% bounce back. Now, closing at 295 and change. So it's not surprising, right? I mentioned yesterday how it wouldn't be surprising to get a bounce, right? It's just, again, when a stock falls this aggressively, it's just you're gonna get a bounce. That's just how these things work, right? You're gonna get a bounce. It's gonna move back up. And more often than not, they're considered dead cat bounces, where the bounce is essentially just to offset the very aggressive selling pressure back to the opposite direction. Because again, if it only goes down, then it's almost like too easy. You know what I mean? So essentially, dead cat bounce, and that's kind of arguably sort of what we're in right now, arguably, right? So let's go over it very quickly on the 1 hour or the daily chart first. And the first thing I want to show you, and I guess really bring your attention to, is going to be this kind of thick white line that you see right here going across the screen, sort of, right? That is simply put the 200-day moving average. What does that actually mean? Well, it's a pretty big moving average. I know, admittedly, I don't put as much weight into it as a lot of people do. Like, they're like, oh, if it's below the 200-day moving average, you don't, watch out. And if it's above, thumbs up. Yeah, I guess. But, I don't put as much weight into it as a lot of people do. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because, well, I know a lot of people do, actually. So it's still important to look at because a lot of people do look at it, even though I'm kind of so-so about it. But nonetheless, the point I'm bringing it up is the fact that in this case, actually, it's been working phenomenally well because, the whole time we were stuck down here, it's actually been rejecting us pretty much the entire time. And finally, we broke out of it. And then that's when we had that pop. Now, and the reason I bring it up is because, well, yesterday's substantial fall did bring the stock back down and closed, more importantly, back down under that 200-day moving average. And even arguably more importantly, we've clearly turned it into a resistance today. As I zoom into today's price action, you can see we pretty much came up right to it, got rejected. And that seems like that's kind of all she wrote, at least for now. So that's kind of what I'm bringing up right now. It is currently sitting at around 305. So in other words, Tesla would at the very least need to start closing daily candles back above 305. That's going to be pretty important to see if that can actually happen moving forward or not. And not too far above that at pretty much 309, which, it'll be a little bit lower on Monday, of course, is the 50 EMA, right? We also have that not too far above us as well as a resistance. But there's very important factors. And I'm going to give you kind of the overall outline, right? We're not going to dive in too much into the short term. I want to give you a little bit more of a zoomed out approach here, a zoomed out perspective, especially with the volatility. I think it's, probably beneficial. And there's a lot to cover here. So the first and foremost, I want to start off with the bearish things. I'll start off with the bearish takes and I'll give you my bullish takes, and in between it'll be kind of mixed as well. But let's start off with this first. So first and foremost, right? Number one, Tesla, obviously massive fall. Today, obviously much tighter of a range, still a pretty big range, but compared to yesterday, pretty small. So what's important here to note is the fact that, well, just based on yesterday's astronomically large red candle, yeah, we printed an inside day candle today. That's just kind of pretty expected it to be, unless we somehow moved more than yesterday's range, which is pretty unlikely. So we did print an inside day candle today. So another way to look at it for Tesla is if we ever break above or below today's high or low, we most likely will continue at the very least to some extent in the respective direction. For instance, breaking above today's high, pretty much, we'll just say 306 to make it a little bit extra safe, could absolutely make Tesla move up to these EMAs all the way up here, which, sometime Monday, probably closer to the 315 to 320 range, which is a pretty important range. I'll go over that very soon. That's to the upside, of course. Now, to the downside, if we break below today's low, which today's low was 291 pretty much. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a retest of this low down here closer to the low 270s. So that's what I would be watching for moving forward, right? Essentially a breakout of this sort of inside day that we printed today. Now, the other thing I want to quickly mention is the fact that, okay, well, before I do that, so if we move to the upside, right? This is going to be an important level up here. Why? Because this is where the EMAs are. This is where the 8 exponential moving averages and the 21 exponential moving averages. And as we get closer and closer and closer, there's a few key resistance points that are, also important to note. one of which being, of course, this horizontal resistance if we somehow make it up to about the 330 range, which even right now, I'm not, I wouldn't hold my breath for that right now because there's a lot to cover or to clear before that. I would be looking for a move again to the EMAs, which, let's say it happens, I don't know, Tuesday or something like that, or Wednesday, or maybe even Monday. It will be somewhere around 315 to 320, but that'll also be pretty much right in line with this trend line right here, which is the trend line that we gapped down below, and then we ended up clearly turning it into a resistance. If some of you remember, actually, just to show what that trend line kind of actually is, I'm going to remove this one for now. This was this trend line here. Remember I mentioned how we were potentially in this sort of, descending channel or something like that, give or take. It was similar to that trend line, right? That looks something like this. Pretty much the same idea roughly. So just, that area will now be a resistance because we broke down below that, which, like I said, is pretty rare. You don't usually break down below descending channels to the south side, like under the channel. That's pretty rare. And now we know why that happened because, it followed up with a pretty substantial move to the downside. So in other words, like I said, if Tesla does break above that high, 305, 306, I don't know, as early as Monday, let's say. Yeah, I'd watch for 315 to 320 as the major area of resistance. Again, the EMAs, the trend line, etc. And best case scenario, back to 330. But that's, like, to me, best case scenario. But the reason this is important is this, right? So if Tesla, for instance, to the downside, and it comes back down to 270. If it loses 270, right? If we lose this range right here that we've bounced off of so far, actually, which is very, very important for me personally, I think it's crucial. This is a very important pivot point. If we lose 270, and let's say we go below 270, 265, or whatever the case may be, even just going below that, but especially closing a daily candle below 270 would be extremely bearish for me. Like, that to me would completely change my perspective on the stock for like a medium term, not necessarily a long term, but definitely medium term, right? And that to me would open up a much lower move, at the very least, to fill some fair value gaps and just general gaps all the way down here in like the mid to low 200s. But it really wouldn't shock me if we end up actually getting a move all the way to this green trend line, all the way down here, like, I don't know, somewhere in the 170s, 180s, something like that. Like that genuinely becomes a topic of conversation. If, of course, it's a big if, but if we lose 270. Crucial. Like, that to me right now is the most important level, like, by far, and like it's not even close, right? Because again, below that, this structure completely falls apart. This area that seemingly is being turned into a support that was a resistance, like I mentioned, falls apart. The structure falls apart. Everything falls apart. It gets really, really bearish below that level, in my opinion. Now, not necessarily we'll just go straight down there, but yeah, the pathway to that becomes absolutely a realistic possibility and something that will be, unfortunately, a topic of conversation. But like I said, if we don't lose below this level, if we hold this level, and we never fall below this level, I mean, do whatever you want here, even come back down once again, whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever we do here doesn't matter. But as long as we hold that 270, I'd actually still view the chart in a daily perspective to be pretty bullish potentially, right? Still have potential bullishness to where even seeing something as high as maybe 400 plus by the end of the year actually becomes a possibility, right? That actually to me becomes a topic of conversation as well. So those are the main things I'll be, personally speaking, watching for over the next days to potentially even weeks, right? We don't know how long it's going to take. So crucial, absolutely crucial. But again, with the MACD bearish, even on today's technically nice green day, or at least relative to yesterday, still up about 4%. Yeah, MACD made a lower low, right? It couldn't care less. It's like, nope, I don't like that. I'm going lower. Not a good sign, right? Not a good sign. We have the stochastic, which just shows momentum. I mean, evidently and obviously falling off a cliff, right? So momentum is definitely fallen off a cliff in terms of aggressive short-term momentum. But the last thing I want to mention that's really important before we jump over to the weekly chart are the actual exponential moving averages. Now, this is, of course, these three lines over here that I use, pretty often in my videos. The green is the 8 EMA, the red is the 21 EMA, the white one is the 50 EMA. Why am I bringing this up? Well, if Tesla, right, and this is another thing I'm watching for, right? So the first thing is 270, that's number one. Number two is I'm watching to see, can Tesla ideally clear pretty much 315 to 320 at least? Can it clear that level sometime next week, ideally? Why do I say that? And why do I say that level, and why do I say next week? Well, two reasons. Number one, that level, like I mentioned, it's pretty much where there's a lot of resistance, where the EMAs are, etc. But the reason I say about next week is because for each day that we are spending down here, or even lower, for instance, let's say maybe we come down back to like the 280s again, 270s, whatever. Each time we're spending there and essentially not making our way back up higher, these exponential moving averages not only are coming back down to us, number one, but number two, they're going to be starting to cross bearish. For instance, we already got the 8 crossing below the 21, which, it's not the worst thing in the world yet. But to me, where things really start getting concerning in terms of just general momentum overall is if both of these get below the 50. Let's take a look at what happened last time that happened, right? So here, for instance, even or when they crossed bullish over here, you can see, you know, it kind of got closer, fully crossing bearish here, but it didn't. And then look at that, ended up getting a substantial spike. Look what happened over here when they had a full bearish crossover right around here. You can see, so we had that initial bearish crossover here with the 8 and the 21, but you know, we still didn't get below the 50. We kind of danced around here for like a week or two. Then what happened? Well, they both ended up crossing below the 50. And then from there, the momentum, now it's not always going to be this insanely bearish and this insanely, you know, aggressive to the downside. But the point is the fact that it got bearish, regardless of how aggressive or not aggressive it was bearish. But the flip is also true, right? The flip is also true, right? So you can see they were cross bearish this whole entire time. Then we got the first sign of potential bullishness. The 8 crossed back above the 21 for once. And then they both started getting back above the 50. And look what happened. We had a beautiful spike up as well. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm kind of giving you right here, where it's really important that Tesla essentially clears this general vicinity-ish, 315, 320, like at least, because that is going to get back above the EMAs without having the risk of them getting that full bearish crossover, which to me is pretty important. If I see that, that to me tells me momentum is pretty dry. Like there's virtually no momentum left from a bullish perspective, and most likely any pop from there will just be continuing to get sold off. Exactly like what happened here. Any pop got sold off, pop sold off, pop sold off, right? Same idea. Or we just get very aggressive downward momentum. So that's gonna be the main things I'll be watching for in the daily. And the last thing I'll talk about is, of course, the weekly. Of course, like I mentioned, last week's candle closure was extremely bearish. You know, you can argue that absolutely played out, at least as it stands right now. So that's really good. But the thing that I'm watching for as well is the fact that you can see on the weekly, you know, Tesla absolutely turned this range right here that clearly was a massive area of resistance many times all the way back here into, so far at least, a support. Another similar to what I mentioned on the daily, which is also yet another reason why to me losing 270 would be extremely bearish. So yeah, let's just say that Tesla does not want to lose 270, guys. Very, very important. If there's one thing to take away, 270, man, watch for that level. Absolutely crucial level in my opinion. But yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. Take a quick look actually at options flow as well before I end off the video. It was pretty bearish towards the end of the day. I assume it was still bearish. Also, the markets are, it's confusing because to me, spying, you kind of look a little toppy, to be completely honest with you, but things like Google or even like Amazon actually look pretty okay still, to be completely honest with you. So it's confusing, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, in terms of options flow, let's take a quick look at options flow towards the end of the day. Yeah, you can see a lot more red than, you know, green, that's for sure. A lot of puts coming in for, you know, next week and the week after for Tesla stock. So yeah, it's not out of the woods yet, that's for sure. So, you know, let's take it day by day, maybe even week by week. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow or on Monday. Peace.